My name is Dana. I'm 60 years old and I am currently living in the city of Sunny Isles Beach, and I'm from Miami Beach, Florida originally. I am a practicing real estate attorney in a large downtown Miami law firm, and I specialize in condominium and plan development law, and I represent home builders nationally and locally. I was diagnosed with endometrial cancer in my mid-40s back in 2007, and it was quite a surprise when I first heard the news and had the diagnosis. It was unexpected. I did have a prior genetic factor, but it was not known to me at the time. Once I was diagnosed through a biopsy to have endometrial cancer, then the physician or the oncologist, who was my primary oncologist at the time, was able to make the connection and essentially connect the dots. So I have what's called Lynch syndrome, and I had a colon cancer diagnosis 20 some odd years ago, but it was not known to me that I had Lynch other than my diagnosis for endometrial cancer, and then the dots were connected. I had gone through a medical procedure, and then actually I was off to elope. I went to Las Vegas to elope with my husband, and when I came back, I learned the news, and of course, it was very surprising because I was kind of moving in a certain direction, and this was again after my honeymoon and my secret marriage, which is now very well known, of course. But I came back to hear the news, and of course, it was pretty devastating. It was not on the radar screen for me, and not expected. Well, I knew that I had some polyps that had to be looked at. My thought at the time was that these were going to be benign, and things were going to go along their merry way. But that was a big shock and a big disappointment. But I was very lucky in the sense that it was diagnosed so early and so incidentally that it saved me, and it had a better outcome for me. So I'm very fortunate. It's always obviously when you hear those words from your doctor that you have cancer, it's obviously a life-shattering and a riveting experience, and it's just earth-shattering, right? It's a watershed moment when you hear those words, you have cancer, right? But once you get through the shockwaves of that expression or that phrase, you say, okay, what comes next? And of course, you go through it. When you're lucky enough to have an early diagnosis, then of course, you brave through it and you move forward. So I was asymptomatic. I had just gone in for a basic medical procedure. I was asymptomatic. I was diagnosed in a very early stage. I had no symptoms and no real awareness of this type of cancer, but for the fact that I was under direct medical care for many, many years because of my original diagnosis of having colon cancer. And so I had certainly a protocol and a regimen, and I see doctors on a regular basis having had the colon cancer. But endometrial cancer was absolutely not on the radar screen for me. And I am still in the care of university professors and university level doctors who watch me very vigilantly, who are very proactive, who always have data and understand pathology and really follow me very carefully and cautiously. And if I credit anything for why I'm here today and having this conversation, it's really because the doctors who take care of me, and I'm essentially a good patient. So when you get the news, whatever that is, and it can be pretty grave news and information, but if you're a proactive patient and a good listener and really think about what it is that is the task at hand and how to confront that diagnosis, you're lucky enough to have good physicians around you that can that can make all the difference in the world. I went in for genetic counseling along the way, many years before I even got a genetic screening. And I happened to be in one of my doctor's visits, and I started looking at my chart, kind of like, okay, I'm bored, or I've got time on my hands, I'm gonna look at it. And I remember looking on the chart, and the genetic counselor wrote, difficult patient. So what that translates into, I believe, is she asks a lot of questions. So am I a difficult patient because I ask question after question after question, or do I constantly challenge? And even though it's not my primary professional capacity, but when it comes to cancer, I'm a numbers cruncher. So I believe in data, I believe in statistics. I look at the numbers, I look at the statistics, and I say, okay, based on this information, these statistics, how do I make an informed decision, right? I think that as a patient, you have to ask a lot of questions. You have to always challenge the data. You have to have a lot of respect for your doctors. So I can't speak for everybody else's experience, but my experience, I worship my doctors. I glorify my doctors because they have the experience and the knowledge to make recommendations. Ultimately, these are my decisions. Do I go for this? Do I go for radiation? Do I take chemotherapy? Do I do this type of surgery? Do I do this type as opposed to the other type? All of those are patient decisions to a large extent, right? But if you're lucky enough to have great doctors that you respect, you're so much further along when you have great medical care, great physicians that can help you and to kind of set your path or set your journey. And I've been very, very blessed and very fortunate to have great physicians, great doctors all the way through. And I will say another factor, because I am a 3-time cancer survivor, I have found my personal experience is stay in the same institution. I've always had one institution for over 20 years. All my records, everything's there. So for example, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, because I had every mammogram study and the same radiologist reading my chart for the same 5+ years, it was that much better to get an early diagnosis from that, because all of my records, all of my information is in one place. And I have found that it has worked very well for me, because in each cancer that I've had, I've been in the same institution with the same level of care and the same doctors, and it has been, they're like the dream team. And for me, that's worked out really well, and I would always recommend that. In terms of genetic testing, it took a long time for me to warm up to the idea of genetic testing. And in retrospect, I think, why was I so reluctant and so reticent? And so, like anything else, nobody wants to hear the news that's bad, or maybe the news that you thought all along. Because 20 years ago, when I had my first cancer, I really did believe in my gut or in my core that I did have the genetic marker, that there was something, it was too young, my diagnosis occurred too young in life, and the factors were all there that I had the Lynch gene. But I will say that I'm actually very pleased and happy that I finally did get that. But what it possesses is really critical information for your life, your ongoing care, your family, and your relations. So for me, the genetic testing was actually very liberating because it confirmed my suspicion. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, and it gave me additional kind of closure in a way, right? So some people, after maybe their first diagnosis, it's recommended, hey, you should go for screening. And maybe people are concerned about, well, where I work, my job, will somebody find out? Will it stay with me? Is there some stigma attached to it? But the reality is, the more information that you have about yourself, your chemistry, and your diagnosis, I think the better your pathway is. And it certainly was, again, a very liberating feeling for me. And I could just basically, close that chapter and say, this is what it was, and this is what I thought all along, and it confirmed for me, and now I can move forward with the information that I have. So I'm certainly a little after the fact, but I definitely recommend genetic screening. It's important for me to share my story. My story is go get your checkups, go on your visits. Don't be intimidated by doctors and even the word cancer. It's just such a frightening concept, and it's a frightening word, but the reality or the importance is that early detection is the key to everything. And if you don't go to your doctors on a regular basis, especially women who go to their gynecologist, their obstetrician, those that go regularly, those doctors are your frontline doctors. In terms of support groups, I'm a great believer in it. I think that living with a cancer diagnosis, endometrial or others, I think having that in isolation and dealing with that on a private and isolated level, it may work for some people. It didn't work for me. I'm not a big believer in, handling cancer in isolation, right? I'm a believer in support systems. I think that it's stronger, but I think that people need others. They need other people. They need support systems. Whether it's your friends that if they didn't know, how can they help you? Or who's going to take you to the doctor? Who's going to take you for that procedure? Who's going to take you for surgery? Who's going to be there for you? You have to lean on other people. My hope is that that women really get regular screening and regular appointments and don't have fear about ongoing doctor's visits and appointments. But even if it's bad news, it's better to have the bad news up front than to wait too long for really bad news, right? So I'm an absolute poster child for ongoing appointments, for routine medical visits, for preventive type care, and really seeking a much more preventive care model in everywhere. And you just got to go to the doctor You got to get your checkups, especially if you have a family history of cancer. Just go get your checkups every year. Go to the doctor, and they're your friend. And whatever the news is, that information is absolute power for everyone. So I'm here to tell the story of go to your visits, go get your checkups, and trust in the experience and the capabilities of your physicians. My advice for anybody who's been recently diagnosed is listen to your doctor, get genetic screening, because you might be at risk for another site, another situation. You might have family members that could benefit from that information. But not only, listen to your doctor, get the genetic screening, get genetic counseling, and because that has consequences for you and for everyone around you. It's important for women to speak up, to seek out information, and to be advocates for one another. I think women's conditions, in whatever form, we have to be much more open and much greater advocates for each other and for ourselves. And I think that's especially so in this area of medical treatment and in medicine. It's time to spot the signs. Spot her for EC.